COVID-19 vaccine patents may be put on pause. The U.S. government has called for waiving vaccine IP protection to fight the pandemic. But critics say this will not solve the root problem of vaccine inequality. How feasible is the proposal? And what must be done to make sure everyone gets a jab? And a U.S. Senate panel has approved a tech investment bill to outcompete countries like China. What might the bill mean for China? And can the two countries compete constructively when it comes to tech? Welcome to Point. Coming to you from Beijing, I'm Wang Guan, sitting in for Liu Xin. The Biden administration announced that it supports a temporary waiver of intellectual property protection on COVID-19 vaccines last week. The World Health Organization's Director General praised the commitment as a quote-unquote monumental moment in the fight against COVID-19. However, others, including some EU countries, have rebuffed the announcement, saying the proposal will create more problems than solutions. How is the waiver supposed to work, and why do different leaders have different opinions? And what are the most pressing concerns in terms of global supply? Joining me today in Guangzhou is Professor Ma Ji, a lecturer at the School of Transnational Law at Peking University. And in Washington, D.C., Dr. Eric Ding, a senior fellow at the Federation of American Scientists. Eric, let me go to you. The U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai on May the 5th released this statement saying the administration believes strongly in intellectual property protections, but in service of ending this pandemic, it supports the waiver of those protections for COVID-19 vaccines. I mean, how exactly do you see this waiver work? I mean, supporting the waiver doesn't necessarily mean lower or affordable costs right away, right? After all, it's up to the pharmaceutical companies, I suppose, to forfeit their right to charge patent fees, no?
Right, this is a good first step and shows commitment, and it draws more people to the table and rallies more countries to work together to waive the patent rights, because it collectively, it's really, really important. Because in addition to patent, there's also tech transfer. There's tech transfer in which there's certain skills and technical expertise that must be shared between countries in order for it to work, in addition to the actual IP legal rights. And so I think this is a really good first step. The negotiations are still going to play out for the TRIPS waiver, and we won't know the exact language because the devil's in the details. And I think how the language is crafted depends on the momentum, because the WTO committee works on consensus basis. So right now we have to build as much support as possible for this to happen. And the more support there is, the better the language in the end, especially for facilitating the tech transfer.
Yeah, Professor Ma Ji, how do you look at Joe Biden's decision to waiver the IP protection for COVID-19 vaccines?
Well, I would regard it is a welcome step, but it is not so essential. Legally, we have the most comprehensive intellectual property agreement, the TRIPS, that already provided us some basic mechanism to allow to waive the IP rights in compulsory license as well as in security exceptions. And we have such regimes already existed. And so just like Eric says, the critical step is how to transfer the technological know-how as well as processing details. However, this kind of a know-how and processing details are not required by IP waiver.
Yeah, Eric, I mean, there are concerns, obviously. French President Emmanuel Macron, for example, said the question of waiving patents was not the issue of the day. The German government has also said similar things, saying the issue concerns production capabilities and maintenance of high-quality standards of vaccines. Those are the more important issues, not the patents per se. I mean, what do you see as the most significant concerns these days?
So first of all, I want to say that although some companies had offered to waive their patents, it's voluntary, as in we won't enforce it. We won't legally enforce it and chase it down if you were to start developing a similar one based on our technology. But that is obviously rescindable at any time. A true TRIPS waiver makes a huge difference because it's not just a certain company on their personal desire at any given time to rescind. Second of all, I think really we have companies. Look, one of the largest manufacturers of vaccines is the Serum Institute in India. And we have companies, 50 companies from Bangladesh to Canada, who say they have the capabilities to make billions and billions of doses. They just need a final technical knowledge sharing. And that knowledge sharing comes from a combination of not just obviously the TRIPS waiver, but also the government encouraging these companies to share. Because right now we already have a share of, for example, Merck is producing vaccines for its competitors as well. They also obviously are sharing technical knowledge. And we have 50 companies around the world who are willing to do that if given the technical knowledge. So it's a combination of government momentum, and TRIPS waiver is the first step in guaranteeing the waiver, not just a company volunteering, as well as the tech transfer itself.
Yeah, Professor Ma, let me go back to you. In October 2020, as early as that, India and South Africa proposed a temporary waiver on COVID-19 vaccines patents to the WHO, but it has not gained wide-scale support since its introduction last year. How do you look at the feasibility of Joe Biden's proposal of waiving this vaccine patent?
Thanks for your question. As regarding the feasibility of the proposal, I would like to analyze this question from two perspectives. The first is from the international perspective. If we need the consensus to achieve the IP waiver, we need global agreement. However, we know that Germany and other European Union states are already beginning to oppose this waiver. And second, from the domestic settings, even if Joe Biden as the President of the United States, that's part of the executive branch of the United States, propose to support this waiver, it still needs support and approval from the domestic legislative body. However, if we look at the United States domestic political settings, the Democratic Party only enjoy a slight majority. So in sum, I'm not so optimistic about the feasibility of Biden's proposal.
Great. Eric, Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla wrote in a colleague letter posted on LinkedIn saying the restriction is the scarcity of highly specialized raw materials needed to produce our vaccine. And he warned that the U.S.-backed proposal will threaten to disrupt the flow of raw materials. I mean, how would the flow of raw materials be disrupted?
I don't think I buy that. The flow of raw materials, yes, there will be a lot of increase in raw material demand because of production in other countries, but that can be overcome. Like, for example, U.S. invoked the Defense Production Act, and that actually ramped up and prioritized these raw materials. For example, the lipid nanoparticles raw materials for the mRNA vaccines. The countries, if there is a demand, they can create the market for that and create the prioritized resources for that. I don't think that's an issue at all. And again, there's many raw materials are made in other countries and shipped to another country for that. So if you're manufacturing in Bangladesh or Canada, they don't have to make it themselves. But the processing of putting it together, there are companies and factories around the world willing to do that all together. And even our current vaccines are made in multiple factories around the world and then assembled together at a later stage. This is what we need, a global supply chain and the political willpower and the economic willpower to put it behind it to do it. And we can. All these other pharma excuses that we've heard for the last 20 years, they don't hold any weight.
Yeah, Eric, let me stay with you. Pfizer CEO also added that although Pfizer used a tiered pricing model for their vaccine and adjusted prices actually down to $10 for the less developed countries and low-income ones, do you think is the price affordable for poor countries by now? How do you look at the pricing mechanism working for the less developed countries?
Well, I think if you have the vaccine made in a country like Bangladesh, it will actually drive down the prices because there's local pricing differences, and local pricing differences is driven down not just by the raw material, but also obviously the labor costs in different countries. The reason the Serum Institute of India mass manufactures the AstraZeneca Covishield vaccine is because they can do it in mass and with very, very much lower costs. And that's why we can probably lower the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to that cost realm as well. And the mRNAs, with enough global production and ramp up, we can lower the cost of almost anything. And this is why a global momentum around this, a global TRIPS waiver, and global knowledge sharing and pulling in the resources of all these different factories around the world can lower the cost even further. And China can make anything much cheaper than the rest of the world as well. We can do it.
Yeah. Many expect a global solidarity at this point. Professor Ma, right now, more than 1.36 billion doses of vaccines have been administered across over 100 countries and regions, according to data collected by Bloomberg. But lower income countries, which make up almost half of the population, have received less than 20% of the total vaccines. I mean, what are the main factors driving this gap?
Well, I think there are several main factors. First, from the geographical point is that these big pharmaceutical companies producing vaccines are located in developed states. So the developed states really have easy access to these vaccines geographically. And geographically, the less developed states and the developing countries are scattered across the globe. So they have no easy access to the vaccines. And besides the geographical point, as well as the manufacturing capacity and the delivering capacity are also critical issues here. The developing states and less developed states have low capacity for manufacture as well as delivering these vaccines. For instance, we know the messenger RNA need low temperature to keep it safe. Well, most of the less developed states just lack of this basic health infrastructure. So that's my point.
Yeah, a lot needs to be done at this point really to ensure equitable distribution of vaccines. Thank you, Professor Mao Ji from Peking University and Eric Ding from the Federation of American Scientists.